So look, I copied and pasted this down here, and I didn't change those around when I did that, so that's my error. So let's see what happens when money supply decreases. So let's put our money supply somewhere around here. Money supply 1, rate of interest over here. Let's say it's about 3%. And the amount of money is there, billions of dollars, how much. Now the Federal Reserve decreases the money supply, and again we'll see how they do that in just a bit. It's going to move supply inward to the left. See there, that'd be money supply 2. And now we'll drive rates up. Maybe 3 to 6%. So decrease the amount of money in the system. That's going to give us a shortage right there. And that's going to have less demand for bonds, less money for bonds. So demand for bonds are going to go down. And that would take that $950 price for a bond to $900, and that would drive up rates of interest. And this is designed to slow down aggregate expenditures. I forgot to say on the previous lecture, when they want to increase aggregate expenditures, they're going to be fighting recession. And when they decrease the money supply, the reason why they're doing that is they're more concerned about inflation, and they want to slow down spending. So high rates of interest are making it more expensive for businesses to borrow money and for consumers to borrow money, and you should see less spending in the system, less aggregate expenditures, all things being equal. So how does the Federal Reserve do this? They do it through what's called monetary policy, using the money supply to move interest rates up or down, to change aggregate expenditures. Now there's a traditional monetary policy, which your book talks about. And this has been taught for a long time with the Federal Reserve. Ever since I've been teaching economics, the traditional monetary policy has been the same. There are 3 main tools of monetary policy, and the first one is known as open market operations. This is the Fed buying and selling U.S. government debt. The Federal Reserve has what's known as a trading desk, and they have employees there who would contact various banks and tell the banks they're interested, the Fed is interested in either buying or selling government debt. The Federal Reserve on its balance sheet has lots of government debt. They purchased a lot of debt in the past. They can have $400, $600 billion of U.S. government debt. And that really is how the Fed finances their operations. The government debt does mature during the year, some of it, and the Federal Reserve gets the principal back plus the interest. And that's the interest they use is how they fund their operations. And in fact, the Fed makes a profit every year because they earn a lot of interest on the government debt, which they purchase with money they create out of thin air. Literally, the Federal Reserve creates money out of thin air. And when those bonds mature, they collect the interest and they pay their operations that way. And any interest that was not used during the year for expenditures is handed back over to the Treasury free of charge. And so one of their tools is open market operations. And what the Fed does before they decide to buy or sell government debt is they want to set a target for what is known as the federal funds rate. So there's 2 interest rates that are going to be on quizzes, exams. One is a discount rate, which is the rate the Fed charges banks. And the other one is the federal funds rate. This is the rate that actually is charged by banks to banks. This is the rate that banks charge each other for loans. These are typically overnight loans, where short-term loans, where one bank will lend money to another bank, normally if they're short of funds for required reserves. So if they have what is known as a reserve deficiency, then say B of A has a reserve deficiency, they could borrow the money from Wells Fargo overnight. Wells Fargo would charge them the federal funds rate, and then B of A would pay it back the next day, the principal plus the interest. So this rate is actually not set directly by the Fed. The Fed sets a target. And then it uses open market operations to move the actual rate, which is known as the effective rate, to the target. So the actual rate, the effective rate, is going to be kind of moving up and down a bit around the target. If the effective rate is above the target, the Fed would do things to drive it down. And if it's below the target, the Fed would do things to drive it up. So here's the Fed's target for the federal funds rate. This goes back to 2016, and this is present, 2020, September, I think. Oh, I think it's 7th July. So you can see the targets are nice steps, nice and clean, and they were raising the targets quite a bit, going from 16 to what about 2019, just the start of the year before the virus hit. And they were doing that because their main concern was about inflation. They felt the economy was doing well. The expansion was going on for a long time through the last 4 or 5 years of the Obama administration and the first 3 years of the Trump administration. And then the virus hit, and then the Fed just dropped the rate real fast, and they just plummeted right there down to 0. Now, there's actually 2 limits. There's a lower limit. This one's a lower limit, and there's an upper limit. The upper limit, I think, is 0.5% above here. And so try to keep the actual effective rate within those limits. And there's a graph that shows the effective rate. That's the kind of jagged line. And the little step there, if you can see it, that's the target. And you can see it kind of gyrates around the target. And that's what the Fed does. They set a target, and then they drive the actual rate to that target as best they can. Now, why the federal funds rate? Well, the Fed thinks the federal funds rate is a key rate, and they're sort of working on the assumption that all rates move together. And so if they drive the federal funds rate up, then the effective rate up, then that would cause mortgage rates to go up, that would cause car loan rates to go up, and so forth. There's a connection there. It's not absolute, but you would find that other rates would move accordingly with the federal funds rate. It may not be the exact same percentage move, but again, they tend to move in the same direction. So when the Fed does open market operations, they have 2 choices. They can do what's known as an open market sale or an open markets. And which one they pick is what is based on what they're trying to do, if they're trying to drive rates up or down. So really the Fed is worried about 2 things. It's going to be the recession, which is their concern now, or inflation, which is where their concern was prior to the corona. So open market sale. Let's see what this does. The Fed announced from the trading desk they want to sell U.S. government debt to banks. And they would announce an amount, and the actual purchase price will be based on what banks are willing to pay. What the Fed does, the Fed just says we're going to sell these treasury bonds or treasury bills, and you guys make an offer on it. And they'll take the highest offer from a bank. And say the bank decides they're going to pay $30 million for these T-bonds. Why would they buy the T-bonds? Because maybe they're a little cheaper than they were last month, and treasury bonds are a good place to put money, banks' money, pays a little bit of interest, and it's pretty darn safe. It's safer than lending the money out to businesses right now when the economy is kind of shaky. Well, what we care about is what that does to the balance sheets. So the Fed sells $30 million of T-bonds to a bank. I'm going to have 2 balance sheets here. One's for the Fed, one's for banks, say Bank of Ontario. And I'm just going to show the changes. So the Fed sells $30 million of T-bonds. They're going to lose them. So over here, the Fed used to have $30 million of T-bonds, which are now gone. And over here, the Bank of Ontario would take them in as an asset. $30 million of T-bonds. Well, now the bank has to pay for these T-bonds. They have to give $30 million to the Fed. One way to do that is to truck over $30 million of cash. But that makes no sense because the bank probably likes the cash to deal with cash withdrawals from their ATMs, things like that. So a much easier way to pay for the bonds, and probably a much safer way, and definitely a cheaper way to pay for the bonds, is to do it simply to have the money taken out of the bank's account with the Fed. So over here, the Fed has an account, the Bank of Ontario has an account with the Fed, and the Fed would keep those deposits over here from the bank as a liability because they owe that money to the bank. Over here, the bank would keep that money on deposit with the Fed as an asset. And so they would tell the Fed, take $30 million out of our deposit with you. So deposit with Fed. And then over here, the Fed would say, okay, we owe you $30 million less. Minus $30 million, we owe you less of the bank's deposit. So what does this do for the economy? Well, what the Fed has done is they've taken $30 million of reserves from the Bank of Ontario, which the bank could have loaned out to you and I, and they've taken that money instead. And where did it go? It disappeared in thin air. One person on a computer at the local Fed, maybe downtown LA, hit a keyboard, said minus $30 million that the Bank of Ontario had with us, and that money is now gone. It simply just vanishes. And so that money no longer can be used by the Bank of Ontario for loans, so this would lower the money supply. Why would the Fed do that? Well, if they lower the money supply, what they want to do is decrease the demand for bonds, which would drive the price of bonds down, and that would drive up interest rates. This is designed to slow down spending, to slow down aggregate expenditures, to fight inflation. Okay, let me stop there, and we'll come back with an open market purchase.